10. Tartaria. Back in 1705, the celebrated French cartographer Guillaume Delisle unveiled a map of Asia that reveals something truly unsettling for modern eyes, challenging everything we thought we knew about history. Sprawling from the towering Ural Mountains all the way to the distant Pacific, from the icy grip of the Arctic down to the borders of China and Persia, was a single, colossal, labeled territory, a landmass of almost unimaginable scale, Grand Tartary. This wasn't some vague region or a mere frontier, it was a named land, roughly the size of every single European nation combined, occupying the very space we now know as Russia, Mongolia, Kazakhstan, and the vast steppes of Central Asia. And Delisle was not an anomaly, far from it. He was merely following a well-established cartographic tradition that had already been in place for a century and would persist for another 150 years. Grand Tartary, or simply Tartaria, made its regular appearance on European maps throughout the 1600s, 1700s, and into the 1800s. It was painstakingly drawn by the finest Dutch, French, British, and German cartographers of the age. It was engraved into lavish atlases printed in bustling Amsterdam and imperial London, then sold to discerning merchants, shrewd diplomats, and even the royal courts of Europe. This sprawling territory depicted on these maps covered all of Siberia, the entirety of Mongolia, and immense stretches of Central Asia, a single unified geographical entity existing on serious authoritative documents for over 2 centuries before finally being broken up into the familiar modern political divisions we now wrongly assume were always inevitable. What truly unsettles modern viewers, however, are the illustrations. Western mapmakers routinely filled the interior of Tartaria with exotic imagery. Khans seated on opulent thrones, elaborate tents so grand they rivaled small palaces, vast processions of camels and horses, and even strange animals that no European had ever observed in real life. Lions swaggered across landscapes where lions simply do not live. Elephants roamed at latitudes no elephant could possibly survive. Cities were marked with names that vanish in the face of any other historical record. The cartographers were certainly filling empty space, yes, but they were also doing something more profound. They were sending a clear signal to the map's buyer. They were affirming that this place existed, that it was populated, that it boasted rulers, architecture, and immense wealth. Yet simultaneously admitting that almost nothing about it was truly known to the very men who drew it. The historical reality, it turns out, is both more grounded than those fanciful images suggest and, at the same time, far stranger. The territory labeled as Tartaria was indeed genuinely inhabited. Turkic and Mongol peoples had lived across that immense geography for millennia, organized into complex khanats, powerful tribal confederations, and sophisticated trading networks that spanned from the Pacific Ocean all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. The name itself was derived from the Tatars, one of the many peoples Europeans encountered in the long, tumultuous aftermath of the Mongol conquests. What the maps got fundamentally wrong was not the existence of people in that vast space. What they truly misunderstood was the sheer scale of European ignorance about who those people actually were. And this is precisely where this territory becomes fertile ground for something much darker. In recent decades, modern conspiracy theories have aggressively latched onto the concept of Grand Tartary, falsely claiming it was a hidden, advanced civilization, an empire of mud-flood architecture and free energy technology, systematically erased from history by a coordinated, clandestine cover-up. This outrageous claim is utter nonsense. The peoples of Tartaria left behind undeniable archaeological records, extensive written documents, rich oral traditions, and millions of direct genetic descendants who continue to live in those regions today. Nothing was erased. What truly changed was the cartography itself. As Russian expansion relentlessly pushed eastward, meticulously filling in the Siberian interior with surveyed detail, as Qing China extended its administrative reach northward, and as aggressive imperial powers carved the vast steppes into meticulously defined provinces and protectorates, the single monolithic label of Grand Tartary became utterly obsolete. It dissolved, fragmenting into distinct regions like Yakutia, Buryatia, Outer Mongolia, and Russian Turkestan. The empire didn't vanish in a puff of smoke. It was simply administratively replaced. But an unsettling residue remains. For 200 years, the most sophisticated mapmakers in the world meticulously drew a vast territory they could not truly describe, populated it with powerful rulers they could not name, and then sold those very maps as authoritative documents of geographical truth. The label on the parchment, remarkably, outlasted the actual knowledge that produced it. Tartaria is the first crucial lesson this video will offer about old maps. They are not always translucent windows into long-vanished worlds. Sometimes they are simply opaque mirrors, reflecting back to us the vast emptiness of what their makers did not or could not know. And occasionally, the immense canvases of these maps, though reflections of unknown territories, feature gaps so cavernous they could engulf entire continents. Sometimes, however, the void is considerably smaller. Sometimes the missing element is merely a single island. Consider number 9, Buss Island. In the year 1578, an English vessel, the Emmanuel of Bridgewater, a sturdy cargo ship belonging to a class known as a buss, was completing its return journey from Martin Frobisher's third expedition to the Canadian Arctic. It was during this homeward voyage that its crew reported an astounding spectacle, an uncharted landmass in the frigid waters stretching between Ireland and Greenland. Their description was remarkably precise, an elongated island, seemingly mountainous with a fertile appearance, situated directly along their course through the vast North Atlantic. This sighting was meticulously logged and the report dutifully filed. The island, in turn, was christened after the very ship that claimed to have discovered it. Yet for an incredible 2 centuries thereafter, Buss Island consistently materialized on map after map, charting its persistent, impossible existence. Despite the detailed accounts, Buss Island never truly existed. Dutch cartographers meticulously inscribed it onto their charts. English mapmakers, in turn, diligently depicted it. French and Spanish navigators, trusting their predecessors, painstakingly copied it into their own nautical documents. By the early 1600s, Buss Island had migrated across dozens of active sea charts, firmly established as a verified feature of the North Atlantic. Seasoned captains carefully navigated their vessels around it. Major shipping companies recalibrated their routes to accommodate its presence. The Hudson's Bay Company, at one point, even laid claim to it as a colonial possession. An island that no human foot had ever touched was actively managed as a sovereign territory. The sheer scale of this cartographic illusion is truly difficult to comprehend. For over 200 years, Buss Island maintained an unbroken presence on maps. It appeared on charts produced by every significant maritime power in Europe. This phantom landmass roughly rivaled the size of a smaller European nation, depicted with detailed mountains, distinctive coastlines, and even specific harbors, all set amidst the open ocean between 2 perfectly real landmasses that thousands of ships traversed annually. Over this long period, repeated expeditions were specifically launched with the explicit goal of locating it. Each mission, without fail, returned empty-handed, generating reports that were quietly shelved, while the spectral island itself stubbornly remained on every new map. But this is where the narrative takes a genuinely unsettling turn. The cartographers, in time, became aware of the lie. By the late 1600s, returning navigators from the North Atlantic were overwhelmingly reporting that Buss Island simply could not be found. Faced with this accumulating evidence, rather than simply erasing the non-existent island, mapmakers began a deliberate process of relabeling it. The island, once confidently illustrated with towering mountains and verdant forests, was subtly rebranded as the sunken land of Buss. Charts produced well into the 1700s began to show it as a submerged feature, a shallow region, a dangerous hazard to navigation. The implication was clear: the island hadn't been a mistake, it had merely sunk. The maps, therefore, were not wrong. The very geography had simply undergone a radical alteration. This ingenious mechanism should truly unnerve anyone who has ever implicitly trusted a navigation chart. Confronted with the undeniable impossibility of an island that stubbornly refused to be located, the cartographic profession did not acknowledge or expunge the original error. Instead, it systematically rewrote the ocean itself to accommodate the persistent fiction. An entire body of water was reimagined as the watery grave of a landmass that had, in fact, never existed. To admit the initial error would have necessitated questioning the entire chain of authority that had diligently copied it forward for 2 centuries. The sunken land of Buss continued to haunt British Admiralty charts well into the 19th century. Sailors navigating during the Napoleonic era were still being cautioned about perilous shoals, the supposed resting place of a country first concocted by the weary, imaginative crew of a homeward-bound vessel in 1578. What makes the tale of Buss Island particularly haunting is what it reveals about the very discipline of map-making itself. This isn't a piece of local folklore. This isn't some ancient legend whispered quietly in coastal villages. This is a fully traceable, documented case where a phantom landmass officially entered the authoritative cartographic record. It was meticulously reproduced by professional surveyors for 200 years, then geologically reinterpreted when its physical existence could no longer be credibly defended, and finally removed only when the institutional humiliation of maintaining the fiction outweighed the powerful inertia of deeply entrenched tradition. The maps lied. The maps continued to lie. And these maps lied in a coordinated, multi-generational, transcontinental fashion that no single individual navigator possessed the authority to correct. If a landmass that never truly existed could endure on official charts for 2 full centuries, the inescapable question that arises is the one no cartographer ever wishes to confront. What other fictions did these maps dutifully preserve, fictions that the ocean itself never truly contained? And what, I wonder, did they ruthlessly scrub away from those ancient maps, things the boundless ocean once genuinely held? Let's talk about number 8, Hy-Brasil, the island that simply refused to be erased. Way back in 1325, a Genoese mapmaker named Angelino Dulcert meticulously drew a chart of the North Atlantic. Right there in the vast expanse of ocean west of Ireland, he placed a perfectly circular landmass and labeled it Hy-Brasil. This island had no recorded discoverer, no bold expedition behind its placement, not a single first sighting documented anywhere. It simply materialized on Dulcert's map, as if he were copying it from some even older, lost source. From that pivotal moment, for nearly 500 long years, Hy-Brasil stubbornly clung to its place in European cartography. While other phantom lands like Buss Island faded away within a mere 2 centuries, Hy-Brasil defiantly persisted well into the 1800s. Map after map, generation after generation, that same impossibly perfect circle reappeared in roughly the same part of the ocean. Cartographers who had never even met scrupulously copied it, transcending language barriers and vast empires. Its distinctive shape barely changed, a flawless ring of land neatly bisected by a single channel running straight through its center, as if some long-lost geometer had designed it with an ancient compass. Often, it was depicted with a verdant green hue. Sometimes, artists showed it half dissolved in mist, the pigment fading at the edges to suggest something that couldn't quite fully resolve, even on parchment. But it wasn't just on maps. There were the visitors, too. Hy-Brasil wasn't merely drawn, it was reportedly seen. Sailors braving the cold grey waters west of Galway and Donegal returned to port across the centuries, swearing they had glimpsed it on the horizon. The folklore that grew up around the island claimed it was visible only one day every 7 years, momentarily surfacing from the Atlantic mist like a held breath, then vanishing again into the churning grey. Most of these reports came from men who had absolutely no commercial motive to invent such a tale, nothing to gain from its telling. They saw what they believed they saw, they simply told what they genuinely believed. And the cartographers, they just kept drawing that circle. Then, in 1674, the testimony dramatically escalated from a mere sighting to an actual landing. A Scottish sea captain named John Nisbet reported that his ship, en route from France to Ireland, had become suddenly enveloped in a thick fog, only to emerge near an unknown island. He claimed his crew rowed ashore. They vividly described encountering black rabbits and an elderly man living in a stone castle, who graciously provided them with gold and silver before sending them on their way. This account, sensational as it was published, fiercely debated, and then seamlessly folded into the existing lore of Hy-Brasil. Predictably, a second expedition was reportedly mounted specifically to verify Nisbet's incredible claim. The island was never found. This then became the recurring pattern that began to define Hy-Brasil's cartographic existence across the centuries. A map shows an island. A sailor sees an island. Another sailor dramatically lands on an island. A subsequent search expedition finds absolutely nothing. And yet the very next cartographer, drawing the very next chart, includes the island again. Why? Because the sheer volume of testimony is simply too numerous to dismiss, and the precedent set by older maps is far too established to unilaterally override. The phantom feeds itself. Belief generates new sightings. Those sightings, in turn, reinforce the belief. The mysterious circle in the ocean becomes progressively more real with each passing decade that fails to conclusively disprove its existence. What makes Hy-Brasil particularly unsettling is the almost impossible geometric specificity of its depiction. Sailors, as a rule, don't invent perfect circles. Imagined islands tend to shift and drift in shape across retellings, acquiring new peninsulas and bays as different artists interpret them. Hy-Brasil, however, does not drift. From Dulcet in 1325 all the way to the British Admiralty charts of the 1800s, the perfect circle holds. The central channel holds. Its precise position west of Ireland holds. something in the very source material that fed European cartography for 5 unbroken centuries simply would not allow that image to mutate. The island was finally and definitively removed from official charts in 1865, though in its final appearances it was often labelled as a mere rock rather than a full landmass, before being erased entirely. To this day, no geological survey has ever discovered a submerged feature in that documented position that matches the unique shape. The Porcupine Bank, a real underwater plateau west of Ireland, does sit in roughly the correct area and has been proposed as a possible inspiration, but it bears absolutely no resemblance to a circle bisected by a channel and lies many hundreds of meters below the surface. So Hy-Brasil, an enigma that predates even the Black Death, lived on to outlast the vast Spanish Empire. This enduring phantom of Hy-Brasil survived the exacting scrutiny of the Enlightenment, the sweeping changes of the Industrial Revolution, and even the revolutionary precision brought by the marine chronometer. For a staggering 500 years, serious men, their hands tracing lines on charts, truly believed that somewhere in the vast Atlantic lay a verdant, circular island waiting for them. They harbored the conviction that with enough luck and the right alignment of cosmic cycles, they would one day gaze upon it themselves. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. The question of what generations of intrepid sailors were actually seeing or imagining is left lingering, forever suspended in the misty grey waters where maps once confidently placed it. Our next impossible island is Antillia, often referred to as the Island of Seven Cities. In the year 1424, a skilled Venetian cartographer named Zuayan Pizzigano meticulously completed a port-a-land chart of the Atlantic. But this chart contains something utterly astonishing, something no European of that era had any rightful business mapping. Far to the west of Portugal, poised roughly halfway across an immense ocean that no European had yet dared to cross, he meticulously drew a substantial rectangular island, rendering it in a striking red pigment. Across its vivid surface, he marked 7 distinct cities. Beside each city, he carefully inscribed the name of a bishop. This enigmatic island was christened Antillia. This chart, with its impossible island, predates Christopher Columbus's monumental first voyage by an impressive 68 years. It predates Vasco da Gama's historic journey. It predates every single documented European crossing of the Atlantic by nearly 7 decades. Yet, there it sits, a precisely rendered landmass, depicted in waters that, according to the official narratives of exploration, no living European eyes had ever witnessed. The captivating legend entwined with Antillia is even older than the map itself. According to medieval Iberian tradition, in the year 714, as the relentless Moorish armies swept across the Iberian Peninsula, toppling the ancient Visigothic kingdom, 7 Portuguese bishops took desperate action. They gathered their congregations, loaded them onto ships, and fled westward, seeking refuge in the boundless expanse of the open Atlantic. They weren't on a quest for new trade routes, nor were they searching for new territories to claim. They were desperately seeking a sanctuary, a place where the crushing tide of conquest simply could not follow. The legend maintains that these courageous bishops eventually made landfall on a vast island, situated far beyond any known shore. There, each bishop founded a city. 7 bishops, 7 cities, a defiant civilization in exile, meticulously preserved on the distant side of the ocean, while the world they had abandoned crashed and burned behind them. For 7 long centuries, this incredible story circulated through the bustling Portuguese and Spanish ports, existing as a beguiling blend of half-myth and tantalizing rumor. Then, in 1424, it manifested on a map. The Pizzigano chart's depiction of Antillia is truly striking in its extraordinary specificity. This isn't some vague possibility, some speculative smudge on the parchment. It is rendered as a sharply defined, hard-edged red rectangle, precisely oriented north to south, with proportions and coastal details so intricate they rival islands the cartographer had actually surveyed. Each of the 7 cities is not just marked, but illustrated. Each carries a unique name. The map treats Antillia not as a fanciful legend, but as a known geographical entity, one that just hadn't been visited by the mapmaker's own generation. The implications of this specificity are absolutely staggering. Either Pizzigano conjured a fantastical landmass in remarkable detail and then somehow convinced a multitude of subsequent cartographers across various nations to slavishly copy his invention, or he was working from much older, unknown source material that described an Atlantic landmass. A landmass that, by all accounts, nobody in his century was supposed to have any knowledge of whatsoever. Antillia stubbornly continued to appear on European charts for over 150 years, after 1424. its precise position drifting slightly from one map to the next, yet never entirely vanishing. Cartographers in vital hubs like Genoa, Lisbon, Florence, and Nuremberg diligently reproduced it. With each passing generation, mapmakers faithfully passed this curious red rectangle forward, as if it were an undeniable, settled piece of cartography. And then a resourceful Genoese sailor named Christopher Columbus came into possession of these very maps. The historical record is crystal clear on this particular point. In the crucial years leading up to his momentous 1492 voyage, Columbus meticulously studied all the available Atlantic charts in intricate detail. And the charts he pored over, the ones that shaped his thinking, undeniably showed Antillia. Letters exchanged between Columbus and the esteemed Florentine physician Paolo dal Pozzo Toscanelli directly reference the island as a critical potential waypoint, a strategic place to resupply during the long, arduous westward passage to Asia. Columbus did not simply venture into an empty ocean, blindly searching for some unknown world. He embarked on his journey with the firm expectation of finding a specific mapped island, ideally situated roughly halfway to his ultimate destination. Antillia was an integral, calculated part of his navigational planning. The voyage that ultimately opened the entire Americas to European contact was, in part, routed around a civilization that those persistent maps insisted was already there. But he did not find Antillia. He found something else entirely. Yet the islands Columbus did encounter, those that ultimately became Spain's initial foothold in the New World, were christened with the name of that very island he missed, the Antilles. This name endures on every contemporary Caribbean map, a linguistic relic echoing a crimson rectangle no expedition ever reached, founded by 7 bishops no historian can ever definitively confirm. It was charted by a cartographer who, astonishingly, placed land in waters no European of his era had even traversed. The bishops, if they truly existed, offer no traceable descendants. The cities, if ever constructed, remain undiscovered. Regardless, the map persists, and the journey it inspired fundamentally reshaped our world. Our next mystery, number 6, the Kingdom of Saguenay. This was no myth to the Iroquoians. They swore it was real. In the 1530s, the French explorer Jacques Cartier navigated the St. Lawrence River, venturing into territory previously uncharted by any European. His primary quest was a passage to Asia, but, as his own journals reveal, what he discovered was far stranger. The Iroquoian peoples he encountered, particularly those inhabiting Stadacona, near modern Quebec City, spoke of a kingdom situated north and west of their lands. They called it Saguenay, and their description of this place defied every European understanding of the New World. The Iroquoians insisted that this kingdom was immeasurably wealthy. Its rivers, they claimed, flowed with gold, and its mountains yielded rubies. Moreover, its inhabitants were unlike any people Cartier had yet met. They were described as pale-skinned, bearded, and blonde-haired, clad in woolen garments, ruling from cities built of solid stone. Donnacona, the formidable chief of Stadacona, recounted these descriptions with such unwavering consistency and vivid detail that Cartier eventually brought him back to France to deliver his testimony directly to King Francis I. Donnacona presented the very same account to the French court that he had shared along the banks of the Seine. Lawrence River, a northern civilization populated by white men, possessing immense wealth and advanced cities. The French, surprisingly, believed him. This is the pivotal moment where this narrative diverges from every other entry on our list. Saguenay was not conjured from ancient Greek poetry. It wasn't an educated guess extrapolated from a Renaissance scholar's atlas. It wasn't even an invention by sailors trying to rationalize phantom horizons. Instead, it was meticulously reported by the very people who lived adjacent to the territory in question. And when European cartographers began to delineate the interior of what they termed New France, they placed Saguenay squarely on the map. 16th century French maps of North America depict Saguenay as a clearly defined political entity, not a question mark, not a vague label, but a full-fledged kingdom. Some maps even illustrated its cities, while others showed rivers, shaded gold, flowing from its mountains down toward the St. Lawrence. These cartographers had never actually been there. They were drawing what the Iroquois had described and what Cartier had painstakingly documented, effectively translating indigenous testimony into the visual language of the European Empire. For several decades, the most authoritative maps of the continent treated Saguenay as an established, undeniable fact of North American geography. The French crown, in turn, acted upon these maps. Cartier's third voyage in 1541 was explicitly launched with the purpose of finding Saguenay. This expedition represented France's most ambitious undertaking in the Americas to date, furnished with colonists, livestock, and the very machinery of permanent settlement. Yet it failed. Cartier returned with what he earnestly believed were diamonds and gold, which tragically turned out to be mere quartz and iron pyrite. The phrase, false as a Canadian diamond, subsequently entered the French lexicon, a poignant linguistic monument to that profound disappointment. But this profound disappointment did not extinguish the legend. France subsequently financed multiple expeditions, each one dedicated to finding the kingdom the Iroquoians had so consistently described. Each pushed further into the unforgiving interior of what is now northern Quebec, and each returned with nothing. The kingdom was never found. What makes this tale of Saguenay particularly unsettling is the sheer reliability of the original testimony. The Iroquoians of Stadacona weren't spinning tales for the entertainment of foreigners. They were describing the actual geography of their own continent, the intricate political landscape they themselves navigated every single day. Donnacona repeated his account in 2 different languages, on 2 separate continents, to 2 distinct audiences, without ever once contradicting himself. Either Cartier's host, Donnacona, was maintaining a complex deception for reasons no historian has ever adequately explained, or he was genuinely describing a place that existed somewhere deep within the vast, uncharted wilderness to his north. Then, the Stadaconans themselves vanished. By the time Samuel de Champlain sailed into view in 1608, the entire Iroquoian population that had welcomed Cartier was gone. Their villages lay abandoned, their language lost to the winds of time. Whatever knowledge they possessed about Saguenay, whatever first-hand or second-hand experience forged their consistent testimony, disappeared with them into the mists of history. Yet the maps remained. The elusive kingdom they depicted remained undiscovered. And the forested territory the Iroquoians had pointed to, the cold, immense expanse of northern Quebec, continues to be one of North America's least archaeologically explored landscapes. Somewhere within those intricate illustrations of stone cities and rivers of gold, a persistent question lingers, unanswered by any expedition that followed. The Iroquois insisted it was real. The French believed them enough to risk financial ruin in their relentless pursuit. And then, everyone who had ever spoken its name was gone. Now for number 5, Thule. Around 325 BC, a Greek explorer named Pytheas of Massalia sailed his ship out of the Mediterranean Sea, through the legendary Pillars of Hercules, and turned his prow northward. He continued his journey past Britain, then past the cluster of islands his contemporaries believed marked the absolute edge of the habitable world. 6 days' sail north of Britain, he claimed to have reached a land where the sun barely dipped below the horizon, and where the sea, the air, and the very earth seemed to merge into a single, congealed substance he chillingly compared to a sea lung. He named it Thule. Upon his return to the Mediterranean when he relayed his astonishing account, the Greek geographers who heard him immediately dismissed him as a liar. His harrowing tale survives only in fragments, quoted by later writers who frequently cited him specifically to ridicule his claims. The original written account of his voyage vanished, lost to the centuries. The name, however, endured. For nearly 2,000 years after Pytheas, Thule existed in a strange, ambiguous cartographic limbo. It appeared on countless maps. It heavily influenced subsequent exploration. Roman geographers, medieval monks, and Renaissance scholars all debated its existence and location, yet no one could definitively agree on where Thule actually was. Was it Iceland, Greenland, the frigid northern coast of Norway, the distant Shetlands or Faroes? Every newly discovered northern landmass encountered by European explorers was, at some point, identified by someone as the true Thule. The name detached itself from any specific geography, drifting freely, attaching itself to whatever frozen edge of the known world happened to be under scrutiny at the moment. Then, in 1539, the Swedish ecclesiastic Olaus Magnus published the Carta Marina, one of the most intricately detailed and visually stunning maps of northern Europe ever created. Thule is clearly depicted on it, situated somewhat vaguely in the waters between the Shetlands and Iceland, surrounded by a terrifying menagerie of writhing sea monsters, treacherous ice floes, and daunting depictions of whales so colossal they could swallow entire ships. The Carta Marina was far from a fantastical document. It was, in fact, the most accurate cartographic representation of Scandinavia available in its era, relied upon by sailors, merchants, and diplomats for over a century. And on this authoritative map, in the cold grey waters of the far north, Olaus Magnus drew Thule as if it were a real, tangible place that simply hadn't yet been properly visited or explored. But here is where the story of Thule truly takes a disturbing turn. The place itself may never have existed as a distinct landmass. Pytheas might have seen Iceland. He might have observed the coast of Norway during the depths of winter. Perhaps he encountered vast expanses of sea ice and described it using the only metaphors comprehensible to a Greek from the sunny Mediterranean. The geographic Thule is almost certainly a hazy, confused recollection of a genuine northern voyage, filtered through 2,300 years of second-hand transmission and retelling. The cartographic Thule, that intriguing island on the Carta Marina, besieged by monsters, is nothing more than a ghost. A name without a country, a coordinate without a true coast. What transpired next is what makes Thule utterly unlike any other entry on this list. The myth outlived any potential geography. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, various occult and nationalist movements across Europe began to sift through the historical cartographic record, intentionally pulling the concept of Thule back into modern discourse. They began to claim it had once been the ancestral homeland of an ancient superior race. Its inhabitants, they declared, had once possessed profound and advanced knowledge, now tragically lost to the annals of history. Secret societies formed dedicated to unearthing these forgotten truths. The most infamous, the Thule Society, born in Munich in 1918, drew its very essence and name from this mythological northern homeland, as depicted by Pytheas and immortalized in the Carta Marina. This society, steeped in the occult, became a direct ancestor, a dark progenitor of the political movement that would grip and then consume Germany a mere decade later. The path was chillingly clear. A map, a mere representation, transformed into a powerful mythology. This mythology in turn became a twisted justification. And that justification ultimately spiraled into a global catastrophe, directly contributing to the deaths of tens of millions of people. The sheer implications of this journey are absolutely staggering. Imagine the hazy, likely misremembered account of a northern voyage by a lone Greek explorer, initially met with skepticism and then faithfully reproduced on a 16th century map, complete with sea monsters and frozen waters. This ancient curiosity, through a perverse chain of events, evolved into one of the foundational, most potent symbols of a 20th century ideology built on racial supremacy. In this chilling historical episode, the cartographic record did not function as objective evidence of a lost civilization. Instead, it served as the raw, pliable material from which an entirely fabricated civilization was meticulously constructed. The original mapmakers, blissfully unaware, had no inkling of the monstrous legacy they were inadvertently creating. Olaus Magnus, in sketching his Thule, merely intended a cartographic curio, a respectful nod to classical learning, a convenient placeholder for the vast, unexplored mysteries of the northern reaches. Yet, some 400 years later, men in Munich would eagerly point to the maps created by his successors and declare with zealous conviction, "There, that is our Genesis. That is the heritage we squandered." The truly unsettling revelation gleaned from the saga of Thule is what it lays bare about the intrinsic nature of cartography itself. A map is far from a neutral document. It is, fundamentally, a claim. And these claims, once committed to ink and reproduced across centuries, accrue a powerful, almost self-fulfilling authority. This authority does not, crucially, depend on the underlying geography actually existing in reality. Thule was mapped and visually represented long before anyone ever sought to find it. It was believed in with fervent conviction before any genuine expedition was ever mounted to discover it. And when future cultures desperately craved an origin story, they did not embark on painstaking archaeological searches for verifiable evidence. Instead, they simply searched the maps. The frigid grey waters of the Carta Marina, with its fantastical sea beasts and its utterly desolate coastline, proved more than sufficient for their purposes. Pytheas sailed 6 days north of Britain in 325 BC, encountering something that defied his complete description. Whatever he truly witnessed has vanished, dissolving into the same all-encompassing fog that ultimately swallowed his original manuscript. What persists is merely the name, drifting like a phantom across the cartographic record for more than 2 millennia, readily attaching itself to whatever meaning the next generation, in its need, required it to signify. Our next entry, number 4, Hyperborea. In 1595, the year immediately following his passing, the renowned cartographer Gerardus Mercator's son unveiled a map that, by all accounts, simply should not have existed. This map depicted the North Pole not as a blank, ambiguous space, not as a question mark signifying the unknown, not as the swirling empty void that virtually every other map of that era acknowledged at the very top of the world. Instead, it depicted the pole with startling, meticulous geographic detail. 4 colossal islands were arranged in a perfect, breathtaking symmetry around the precise polar point, each separated from the others by 4 immense rivers that flowed inward, converging at the absolute center. And at the exact heart of this extraordinary arrangement, where all 4 landmasses met, rose a singular, imposing black mountain. Mercator, in his precise hand, labeled it the Rupes Nigra, the Black Rock. The map was undeniably beautiful, imbued with an unwavering confidence. Yet, tragically, it was profoundly wrong in ways that should have been utterly impossible. The ancient Greeks had for over 2,000 years been speaking of this very place. Herodotus in the 5th century BC made mention of the Hyperboreans, describing them as a people who dwelled beyond the northern wind, in a land blessed with perpetual sunlight. Pindar, writing slightly earlier, painted their country as a joyous paradise of endless feasting and song, a place where neither sickness nor the ravages of old age ever touched its inhabitants, and where the sun shone for all 24 hours of every day. These ancient accounts across different authors agreed on certain striking details with an unsettling, consistent harmony. The Hyperboreans lived at the absolute summit of the world. Their land, remarkably, remained warm despite its extreme northerly position. The sun, miraculously, never set. They lived in a state of happiness that the Greeks, in their realistic view of human existence, believed was simply unavailable to ordinary mortals. None of this information should have been within the Greeks' grasp. They had never dispatched Arctic expeditions. Their understanding of polar latitude extended no further than abstract philosophical speculation. Yet, the detail regarding continuous sunlight describes a real, tangible phenomenon. The Arctic summer, when the sun indeed remains above the horizon for months on end. But it describes a phenomenon that no Mediterranean culture, lacking the means for such journeys, had any practical way of observing. Yet there it is, perfectly preserved within their ancient texts. Imagine a chilling accuracy, a precise description of the sun's behavior at high latitudes, woven into ancient myths by people who quite literally had no way of knowing it. They'd never been within 3,000 kilometers of the Arctic Circle. Mercator, centuries later, didn't just inherit this enigma, he intensified it. His seminal polar projection from 1595 wasn't just imaginative speculation, he explicitly claimed a concrete source. In his private correspondence, Mercator openly stated that his Arctic geography was directly derived from a 14th century text, the Inventio Fortunata. This mysterious work was supposedly penned by an English friar who had ventured into the far north and returned with an incredibly detailed account of his observations. This book described 4 distinct islands. It spoke of rivers carving through the landscape. And profoundly, it depicted a formidable black mountain at the very center, around which the polar sea was said to perpetually empty itself in a continuous inward current. However, the Inventio Fortunata is now lost to history. No copy has ever survived. Its very existence is known only through Mercator and a handful of other late medieval scholars who cited it. Mercator himself never even saw the original manuscript. He worked from a summary of a summary, a fragile chain of citations leading back to a document that had already vanished from the world by the time he meticulously crafted his map. Whatever the friar actually witnessed, whatever he claimed to have seen, or whatever someone before him had described, and the friar merely transcribed, that crucial original testimony is utterly gone. Only the stark geography remains, solidified into copper plate ink, meticulously reproduced across European cartography for 2 entire centuries until modern exploration finally began to systematically obliterate its supposed accuracy. And here is where the story veers into the genuinely impossible. The Arctic Ocean, as we know it today, does not feature 4 symmetrically arranged landmasses. There is no colossal black mountain standing defiantly at the pole. The geography Mercator so confidently depicted is, by every measure of modern scientific understanding, pure fiction. Yet critically, the Arctic Ocean does possess a remarkable feature that no European could possibly have known about in the year 1595. Hidden beneath its vast frozen expanse, the polar seabed is profoundly bisected by colossal undersea ridges. The Lomonosov Ridge, the Gackel Ridge, these massive formations divide the polar basin into roughly symmetrical sections. These monumental ridges were not discovered until the 20th century, painstakingly mapped by Soviet submarines and sophisticated acoustic surveys in the 1940s and 1950s. Mercator's depiction, unbelievably, predates modern scientific Arctic exploration by more than 350 years. The resemblance is almost certainly a staggeringly improbable coincidence. The skeptical interpretation suggests that ancient Greek imagination, intertwined with medieval mythology and Renaissance pattern-seeking, serendipitously converged on a geography that just happened to echo features no human eye could possibly have seen. This skeptical reading is most likely correct, yet the unsettling question stubbornly lingers. Where did the Greeks acquire their knowledge of the 24-hour sun? Where did the friar glean his insights about the 4 mysterious islands? And, perhaps most perplexing, where did Mercator, toiling away in his study in Duisburg in 1595, find the absolute confidence to draw the very top of the world as if he had personally stood upon it? The Inventio Fortunata is gone. The enigmatic friar is gone. The Hyperboreans, if they ever truly existed, are long gone. What persists is a map, meticulously drawn by one of the most rigorous cartographers in European history, portraying a place he profoundly believed to be real. Its source was a document that vanished before anyone alive today could ever read it. The geography itself has been utterly disproved, but the unwavering certainty with which it was depicted remains utterly unexplained. Somewhere within that vast chain stretching from Herodotus to Mercator, someone knew something. Or someone simply made an impossibly accurate guess across 2,000 years. That map still appears in atlases, a haunting curiosity, and the mountain at its heart steadfastly remains black. Next, we encounter Mu and Lemuria. In 1864, a discerning British zoologist named Philip Sclater embarked on solving what he anticipated would be a minor taxonomic puzzle, only to inadvertently invent an entire submerged continent. Sclater was a highly respected naturalist, serving as secretary of the prestigious Zoological Society of London, and something he'd observed deeply bothered him. He found lemur fossils turning up in Madagascar. They were also being discovered in India. They were appearing in scattered but significant locations across the Indian Ocean basin. Crucially, however, they were entirely absent from the African mainland or the Middle East, the very territories that should have logically connected these populations. The animals were undeniably related. The existing geography stubbornly refused to cooperate. Sclater, facing this biogeographical anomaly, proposed a radical solution. Sclater put forward a daring idea, a massive landmass, now vanished beneath the waves, once extended across the Indian Ocean. This ancient continent, he theorized, connected Madagascar directly to India, forming a crucial bridge that allowed lemurs to migrate and thus explaining their bizarre distribution. He christened this hypothetical landmass Lemuria. This wasn't some mystical or occult pronouncement. It was a rigorous working hypothesis, presented in a respected scientific journal by a credentialed zoologist, aimed at solving a genuine biogeographical puzzle. This was pure 19th century science operating within its paradigm, proposing land bridges to account for species distribution patterns long before anyone grasped the shocking truth that the continents themselves were in constant motion. The hypothesis, by all accounts, should have faded into obscurity. By the middle of the 20th century, the groundbreaking theory of plate tectonics had provided a definitive explanation for the scattered fossil evidence through the mechanism of continental drift. Madagascar and India, it turned out, were indeed once conjoined as part of the same colossal landmass, only to separate over eons. The lemurs hadn't traversed a submerged continent. They had quite literally ridden the shifting continents themselves through the immense stretches of geological time. Lemuria was suddenly rendered unnecessary. It was no longer considered scientific. By every measure of modern geology, the entire notion of Lemuria was thoroughly refuted. Yet, it profoundly refused to die. The trajectory of Sclater's hypothesis, from its innovative proposal to its definitive disproof, stands as one of history's most peculiar case studies in how purely scientific concepts can escape the confines of laboratories and transmute into something utterly unexpected. The very name, Lemuria, slipped beyond the boundaries of the scientific journal. Theosophists in the late 1800s enthusiastically absorbed Lemuria into their complex cosmologies, populating this supposedly lost continent with ethereal spiritual ancestors and mythical root races. By the early 1900s, this sunken landmass had firmly cemented itself as a recurring motif in esoteric literature, its humble zoological origins almost entirely forgotten. The lemurs, the original impetus, had vanished from the narrative. Only the phantom continent remained. Then, in 1926, a retired British Army officer named James Churchward published a book titled The Lost Continent of Mu. Churchward astonishingly claimed that decades prior, he had been granted access to ancient stone tablets within a secluded Indian monastery. These tablets, he asserted, were inscribed in a forgotten language that only he and the temple's high priest possessed the key to decipher. According to his interpretation, these tablets narrated the epic tale of a vast Pacific civilization known as Mu, a verdant tropical landmass that once sprawled across what is now an empty ocean. This legendary continent, he claimed, was home to an astounding 64 million people, governed by a sophisticated theocracy and ultimately annihilated by a cataclysmic volcanic eruption approximately 12,000 years ago. Churchward's vivid illustrations portrayed Mu as a veritable paradise of intricately carved stone temples and pyramids, adorned with symbols of the sun, ruled by an ancient lineage of priest-kings whose wisdom predated every known civilization on Earth. He never presented any physical tablets. He never revealed the name of the monastery. He produced no verifiable script that any linguist could authenticate. Instead, he simply asserted with the serene self-assurance of a man who had beheld truths invisible to others that an entire, magnificent civilization had once flourished in the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, its irrefutable proof held in a location he could not name, by a priest he could not produce. And yet, the book sold. It continued to sell. Churchward went on to meticulously pen 4 additional volumes expanding on his extraordinary claims. In the vibrant crucible of the popular imagination, Mu and Lemuria began to inextricably merge. Sometimes they were treated as the same singular lost continent. Other times, they became twin civilizations occupying opposing oceans. Occasionally, they coalesced into a single, colossal pre-flood empire, encompassing both the Pacific and Indian oceanic realms. The precise details, it seemed, were secondary. What truly captivated was the compelling shape of the narrative itself. A highly advanced civilization, a lush tropical Eden, impressive stone temples and radiant sun symbols, a devastating catastrophic submersion, and the ocean floor concealing what the ocean's surface had cruelly erased. The truly unsettling dimension of this phenomenon isn't whether Mu ever actually existed. It did not. The established principles of plate tectonics unequivocally rule out the presence of any enormous sunken continent in the Pacific Basin. The geological age of the ocean floor there, its fundamental composition, its entire geological structure, are all fundamentally incompatible. There is simply no geological room for Mu, just as there is no room for Lemuria. Yet the potent legend defiantly persists. Books continue to be written about them. Documentaries continue to be filmed. The profound human yearning for a vanished tropical empire submerged beneath the waves has outlived every single scientific reputation that dared to challenge it. What Sclatter initiated as a scientific footnote concerning lemur teeth blossomed within a mere century into a sprawling global mythology of a drowned paradise. The continent itself was never there, but the deep, abiding human need for such a continent was always profoundly present. And that need, it turns out, possesses a greater, more enduring resilience than any physical landmass. Number 2. Atlantis. Around 360 BCE, the Athenian philosopher Plato embarked on a monumental task, composing 2 dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. Within these pages, he meticulously detailed a civilization that had supposedly vanished 9,000 years before his own era. Plato credited this astounding account to Solon, the revered lawgiver, who, in turn, had purportedly received it from Egyptian priests at the venerable temple of Sais. Plato was adamant this was no allegory, no mythical tale. He insisted it was a factual historical record, diligently preserved through Egyptian memory, describing an empire so vast that its influence stretched beyond the Pillars of Hercules, deep into the open Atlantic. This formidable power ultimately met its end in a single, catastrophic day and night. This formidable civilization bore a name that would echo through millennia: Atlantis. Plato's description of Atlantis was remarkably precise, a stark contrast to the often vague nature of ancient mythologies. He painted a picture of a magnificent city, nestled at the heart of a grand island, meticulously engineered with concentric rings of land and water. These alternating bands were carved with such astonishing precision that ships could navigate through deliberately constructed canals, transitioning seamlessly from the outer sea to the inner harbor. The towering walls of these rings were adorned with 3 distinct colors of stone, red, white, and black, all quarried directly from the island itself. At the very core of the central island stood a sacred temple dedicated to Poseidon, its surfaces gleaming with orichalcum, a mysterious metal that shimmered like fire, its true identity remaining an unresolved enigma even to this day. The Atlanteans commanded formidable fleets and armies, boasting advanced engineering prowess and an imperial reach that spanned the Mediterranean until their eventual defeat at the hands of an early Athens. Then, the ocean claimed them. Plato wrote that in a single day and night of catastrophic misfortune, the island of Atlantis plunged beneath the waves. Every detail of Plato's account was carefully crafted to maximize its historical credibility. A precise date, 9 millennia before Plato, a defined location beyond the Pillars of Hercules at the Strait of Gibraltar, a specific architectural blueprint, and a clear explanation for its demise. The dialogues read less like myth and more like a sworn deposition. For 2,000 years following, scholars fervently debated whether Plato's narrative should be interpreted literally. Yet here is where the story truly takes a turn into the genuinely strange. In 1669, a brilliant Jesuit polymath named Athanasius Kircher published Mundus Subterraneus, an ambitious work striving to chart the hidden geography of Earth's interior and its lost continents. Buried within its intricate plates was a map of Atlantis. Kircher strategically placed it squarely in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, a substantial landmass positioned between Spain and the Americas, oriented with south at the top, a common cartographic convention of his era. He meticulously labeled it, surrounding it with finely drawn coastlines of Africa and the New World. He presented it as cartography, not mere fantasy. What demands particular attention is Kircher's assertion about his source. He explicitly stated that this map had been meticulously transcribed from an ancient Egyptian original. He insisted he had not invented its placement. He had merely reproduced what an older document had already recorded. That original document, of course, has never resurfaced. Kircher's map endures, but its purported source remains elusive. The implications of this convergence are unsettling. Plato claimed Egyptian priests as his authority. Kircher, 2,000 years later, cited an Egyptian document as his. Two men, separated by 20 centuries, both pointed to the same vanished archive when asked to substantiate their knowledge. Whether either was speaking the truth remains an unanswerable question. The very pattern of this recurrence is, in itself, a peculiar artifact. Modern oceanography, however, has not been kind to the literal interpretation of Atlantis. The mid-Atlantic seafloor, precisely where Kircher had situated it, consists of a well-mapped basaltic crust, continuously generated by the mid-Atlantic ridge. There is no evidence of a sunken continent. No submerged plateau matches the dimensions Plato described. The geological reality unequivocally forecloses the simplest reading of the Atlantean tale. And yet the relentless search persists, for the ocean is vast, and human memory, especially for grand narratives, proves remarkably stubborn. Off the coast of the Azores, divers and sonar surveys have repeatedly identified astonishingly rectilinear structures upon the seafloor, formations that do not align with ordinary submarine geology, and off Bimini in the Bahamas, a striking line of massive limestone blocks spanning over half a mile has been photographed along the seafloor since 1968. While geologists have contended that the Bimini Road is merely natural beach rock fractured into deceptively regular shapes, the debate rages on. Yet others vehemently counter that the striking regularity and exact alignment of these submerged structures argue against any natural explanation, hinting instead at an artificial origin. This debate has raged for well over 50 years, never reaching a definitive conclusion. Every few years, another expedition plunges into the depths, another scholarly paper emerges, and another snippet of sonar data surfaces to fuel the controversy. The argument persists precisely because the evidence, while intriguing, never quite tips the scales decisively in either direction. What truly makes the enduring allure of Atlantis so profoundly unsettling isn't merely the question of whether Plato's specific city ever existed. It almost certainly didn't. The disquieting truth lies in the fundamental fact that the most celebrated philosopher of the classical world chose to anchor one of his most ambitious philosophical dialogues to a precise, detailed account of a lost civilization. He meticulously dated its demise to the end of the last ice age, and more importantly, he adamantly insisted upon its historical reality. Adding to this enigma, 2 millennia later, a highly respected scholar published a map claiming to depict this very location, attributing its source to ancient Egyptian knowledge. Somewhere deep beneath the churning Atlantic, the relentless ping of sonar continues to echo off formations that simply shouldn't be there. The mysterious structures off Bimini remain steadfast, unmoving, and the debate continues, as persistent as the tides. Plato's proposed timeline for Atlantis, 9,000 years before his own era, aligns uncannily with a period of catastrophic global sea level rise. During this epoch, coastlines dramatically retreated by hundreds of miles. Whatever advanced civilization may have once thrived along those now submerged shores, it existed then. And then, it vanished. This brings us to our first extraordinary anomaly, the Piri Reis Map. In the year 1929, a team of historians meticulously sifting through the imperial archives of the former Ottoman Empire within Istanbul's Topkapi Palace unearthed a folded piece of gazelle skin parchment. Tucked away amongst ancient naval documents, this parchment captured their attention. Hand-drawn in muted browns and reds, adorned with intricate script, it bore the signature of an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis. The date inscribed on the document unequivocally read 1513. What these historians uncovered as they carefully unfurled the map had implications so profound and unsettling that they remained largely undigested by public consciousness for decades. The map depicted coastlines that, by all known historical understanding, no one in 1513 could possibly have rendered with such precision. Piri Reis was no myth. He was a very real historical figure. A captain in the formidable Ottoman navy, he earned promotion to admiral, only to be eventually executed by his own sultan for reasons entirely unrelated to his cartographic prowess. He authored a seminal work on Mediterranean navigation, titled the Kitab Hy-Brasil. He was, by all accounts, a working sailor and a highly skilled cartographer, not some mystical visionary. In 1513, while stationed in the vibrant port city of Gallipoli, he meticulously compiled a world map from a diverse array of older source materials, painstakingly transcribing them onto a single sheet of gazelle skin. In his own meticulous hand, Piri Reis inscribed marginal notes across the map, explaining his uncommon methodology. He expressly stated that he had consulted approximately 20 older source maps. Some were contemporary Portuguese charts of his era, others were ancient Arabic maps. But most astonishingly, he claimed that some of his sources dated back to the time of Alexander the Great, nearly 1800 years before he himself sat down to compile them. These original source maps are now lost to history. Whatever ancient cartographic tradition Piri Reis drew upon, whatever knowledge he painstakingly copied, has since vanished, leaving the 1513 parchment as the sole surviving testament to a body of geographic knowledge that might have been ancient even when Rome was still a fledgling village. Only the western one-third of this remarkable map endures. It clearly delineates the coast of Western Africa, the eastern coast of South America, and, intriguingly at the bottom of the parchment, extending eastward beneath the southern Atlantic, a long, unfamiliar coastline. A coastline that, by all established history, simply should not be there. In 1513, the southern continent was entirely unknown. The Spanish and Portuguese were only just beginning their epic voyages to chart the eastern seaboard of South America. The vast Pacific Ocean had yet to be traversed by any European vessel. The continent of Antarctica itself would not be officially sighted by any documented expedition until 1820, more than 3 centuries after Piri Reis inked his map. Even then, the true coastline of Antarctica, hidden deep beneath its colossal ice sheet, the actual contour of the bedrock and landforms buried under kilometers of frozen water, would remain unmapped until 1949. That year, a joint British, Swedish, and Norwegian expedition utilized pioneering seismic surveys to penetrate the ice, finally revealing the previously unseen shape of the continent hidden beneath. And yet, the Piri Reis map appears to depict that very coastline. When we compare the southern landmass etched onto that ancient parchment with the seismic survey data from 1949, the precision is astounding. The map's depiction aligns with the subglacial geography of Queen Maud Land so accurately that it defies every conventional explanation we have. We're talking about mountain ranges in roughly the correct spots, bays and inlets that flawlessly correspond to features now buried under ice, and a continental outline that nobody in 1513 or 1819 or even 1948 could possibly have known about. Mainstream cartographers and historians have, understandably, offered a cautious, measured response. They argue that this southern landmass isn't Antarctica at all. No, they claim it's merely a distorted portrayal of South America's southern coast, warped eastward to fit the available space on the parchment. They suggest it was derived from incomplete Portuguese reports, haphazardly pieced together from voyages along the Patagonian coast. In essence, Piri Reis simply ran out of room, they say. He compressed the geography, and any resemblance to Antarctica is purely an accidental coincidence. A trick of pattern matching, where the human mind imposes meaning on a random smear of ink. This is the standard explanation. It's plausible, and yes, it's defensible. But this is precisely where that standard explanation begins to fray, to strain under the weight of the evidence. because these distortions, if they are distortions, are remarkably, suspiciously, internally consistent. The rivers meticulously drawn on this southern landmass align with subglacial river channels that were only mapped in the late 20th century thanks to ice-penetrating radar. And those mountain ranges, if their placement is truly coincidental, are coincidences found in approximately the right locations. But perhaps the most unnerving detail comes from Piri Reis himself. He wrote in his own marginal notes that some of his sources dated back to the age of Alexander the Great. He wasn't claiming to have invented this mysterious southern coastline. He was claiming to have copied it from something far, far older. If he was right, the implications are absolutely staggering. Antarctica's coastline has been entombed under an unbroken sheet of ice for at least the last 12,000 years. And according to most paleoclimate reconstructions, it's been frozen solid for even longer. For any cartographic source to have recorded that coastline as ice-free, it would require one of two impossible scenarios. Either an observer was present before the ice even formed, or an observer possessed the technology to see straight through it. Neither possibility fits comfortably within the accepted timeline of human civilization. The Sumerians didn't have ice-penetrating radar. The ancient Egyptians certainly weren't sailing to the South Pole. And yet, here we have a 16th century admiral in Gallipoli, working from sources he couldn't even fully identify, drawing something onto gazelle skin that flawlessly matches a continent no one would officially see for another 436 years. What makes the Piri Reis Map particularly unsettling is that it isn't some clever forgery. The parchment is demonstrably real. Its date has been verified. The handwriting is authenticated. The admiral himself was a historical figure. Today, the map rests in the Topkapi Palace Museum in Istanbul, faded and delicate, protected behind glass. Visitors can literally stand within arm's reach of it. Those brown ink lines, which may or may not record a continent hidden beneath ice, are right there, meticulously drawn by a working sailor in 1513 from sources that no longer exist. The truly haunting aspect is what it suggests about the lost source maps themselves. Piri Reis described approximately 20 of them. He named some, detailed others, and explicitly indicated that the chain of copying stretched back nearly 2 millennia before his own lifetime. If even one of those sources contained accurate information about a coastline that shouldn't have been known, then a cartographic tradition existed in deep antiquity that chronicled geography no recognized civilization should have possessed. The Piri Reis Map isn't necessarily the direct work of a lost civilization. Rather, it functions as a receipt for one. It's a copy of a copy of a copy, tracing back to something made by someone who gazed upon a continent that has been buried in ice for longer than recorded history has existed. The original map maker is lost to time. The original map is gone. The civilization that produced it, if it ever genuinely existed, left no temples, no cities, no bones we can identify. It left only this: a singular folded parchment tucked away in an Ottoman archive, drawn by an admiral who likely didn't even fully grasp what he was copying, preserved accidentally through 5 centuries of war and shifting empires. And it sits there still, in a museum in Istanbul, still undeniably showing a coastline that no one should ever have seen. This is just one of 10 such maps, spanning 5 centuries of cartography from 1325 to the 1800s, etched on parchment, gazelle skin, and vellum. These ancient surfaces, which by all rights should have disintegrated into dust countless generations ago, somehow remain strikingly legible. They vividly display coastlines that should not exist, and forgotten kingdoms that left no other discernible trace anywhere else in the historical record. Across all 10 of these extraordinary maps, a consistent pattern emerges. Every single map explicitly cites older sources as its foundation. The Piri Reis Map, for instance, openly states it was meticulously compiled from charts already considered ancient by the year 1513. Similarly, Mercator depicted Hyperborea on his maps, drawing from mysterious documents he never once named. Even the Pizzigano chart of Antillia plainly copied from something even older still. It becomes clear that every cartographer in this remarkable lineage acted as a transcriber, not as an originator. They were meticulously copying from maps whose originals have long since vanished and portraying territories that astonishingly outlived the very civilizations that first charted them. Tartaria eventually fell. The elusive 7 bishops of Antillia were never found. Hy-Brasil gradually faded from the turbulent Atlantic. Saguenay, a place of mystery, swallowed the explorers who dared to search for it. The cultures that originally put ink to skin to record these enigmatic places dissolved into the mists of history, yet their parchment survived. The maps, in a profound twist of fate, endured far longer than their mapmakers and even longer than the places they mapped. Somewhere in dusty archives across Europe, that very parchment still patiently waits in climate-controlled darkness, outlasting entire empires, outlasting spoken languages, and outlasting the very hands that first drew it.